In the heart of America's farmland, where golden wheat fields stretch endlessly under azure skies, a simple act of kindness is about to change two lives forever. James Miller has worked his family's struggling farm for 20 years, his calloused hands telling stories of countless dawns and dusks spent nurturing the land. When he spots a well-dressed woman limping through his fields one scorching afternoon, he does what comes naturally. He helps. But this isn't just any lost traveler. Behind her designer clothes and tearful gratitude lies a secret that could transform his world. She's someone who could buy his farm 100 times over, yet finds herself touched by the authentic humanity she's been missing all her life. What happens when genuine kindness meets someone who's never known it without strings attached? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The old pocket watch hadn't kept proper time in years, but James Miller wound it every morning anyway. It was ritual now, muscle memory guiding his fingers across the worn brass surface as dawn painted his kitchen window in watercolor hues. His grandfather's initials, TM, had nearly faded from the back, but he could still feel them under his thumb. 5:15, earlier than most, but that's what the land demanded. He tucked the watch into his shirt pocket, letting its familiar weight settle against his chest as he moved through the quiet farmhouse. Coffee first, strong and black, the way his father taught him. The kitchen's ancient percolator sputtered to life, its rhythm matching the subtle creak of floorboards beneath his boots. Through the window, the first hint of sunrise illuminated his wheat fields, 200 acres of responsibility stretching toward the horizon. The good Lord hadn't blessed them with rain in 3 weeks, and the crops were showing it. Another dry season might be the one that finally broke them. "Dad," Emily's voice, still heavy with sleep, drew his attention. His 17-year-old daughter stood in the doorway, already dressed in work clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "You're thinking too loud again," James managed a smile. "Thought you were sleeping in today? It's Saturday." "Can't sleep when I can hear you worrying from upstairs." She moved to the coffee maker, pulling down 2 mugs from the cabinet. "Besides, those college applications won't fill themselves out." The mention of college twisted something in his gut. Emily's guidance counselor had called last week. His daughter was top of her class, a natural for agricultural science programs, the kind of programs that cost more money than a struggling farmer could dream of providing. "We'll figure it out." "Sweetheart," the words felt hollow, but he said them anyway. "We always do." Emily poured their coffee, adding just a touch of cream to hers, a luxury he'd never deny her, even when the bills piled up. "I know, Dad. That's what Millers do, right? Figure things out." He watched her sip her coffee, seeing shadows of her. Mother in every graceful movement. Sarah would have known what to do about college. She'd always been the practical one, planning 3 steps ahead while he focused on keeping the farm running day to day. 5 years since cancer took her, and he still found himself turning to share thoughts with empty air. The morning routine continued in comfortable silence. Emily checked weather reports on her phone while James reviewed his ledger, a battered notebook filled with columns of red ink. The irrigation system needed repairs, the tractor was making sounds it shouldn't, and their last decent harvest felt like a distant memory. But Millers had worked this land for 4 generations. His grandfather used to say the soil was mixed with their blood, and on mornings like this, James believed it. The watch ticked softly in his pocket, marking time the way it had for decades of dawns just like this one. "Time to wake up the world," he said finally, draining his coffee cup. Emily nodded, understanding the old family phrase. It meant more than just starting the day's work. It meant facing whatever challenges came with the same quiet determination that had kept the farm alive. Through dust bowls and downturns, together they stepped out onto the porch. The sun had cleared the horizon now, turning the wheat into a sea of gold. For a moment, standing there with his daughter, James could almost believe everything would work out. Then the distant groan of the failing irrigation pump reached his ears, and reality settled back in. But Miller's faced reality head-on, always had, always would. He patted the pocket watch, drawing strength from its presence, and started down the porch steps. There was work to be done, and no amount of worry would get it done faster. The irrigation pipe gave way with a sound like a gunshot, sending a geyser of precious water into the dawn sky. James dropped his wrench and jumped back, but not quickly enough to avoid the spray. In seconds, his work shirt was soaked through. The weight of the water, a cruel reminder of how much they needed every drop. "Dad!" Emily's voice carried across the field as she ran toward him, toolbox bouncing against her leg. "I heard it from the barn." "Stay back," he warned, already moving to the main valve. The metal was hot under his hands. The pump had been working too hard for too long. He'd known that, had been babying it along for months because they couldn't afford the repairs. Now they couldn't afford not to fix it. The valve groaned but turned, cutting off the flow. Water drained from the broken pipe, creating a muddy pool around his boots. James stood there for a moment, doing the math in his head. Parts alone would cost more than they had in the emergency fund. Emily set down the toolbox and stood beside him, both of them studying the damage. "We could try that JB Weld stuff again," she suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. They both knew temporary fixes wouldn't cut it anymore. "Go ahead and call Pete at the supply store," James said, pulling off his wet shirt and using it to wipe his face. "See if he'll let us add it to the tab." Emily hesitated. "Dad, I heard him tell Mrs. Henderson last week he's not extending any more credit to anyone. Times are tight all over." The morning sun was climbing higher, promising another scorcher. Without irrigation, the wheat would wither within days. James pulled the pocket watch from his sodden shirt. It had survived the spray, just as it had survived 4 generations of farming mishaps. The brass felt warm against his palm, like it was trying to offer comfort. "Might be time to call Uncle." "Marcus," Emily said quietly. James stiffened. Marcus had left the farming life 20 years ago for a real estate career in Chicago. Every Christmas, he sent cards suggesting James think about his options and consider the development potential of the land. The thought of calling him for help burned worse than the summer sun. A glint of metal caught his eye, an unfamiliar car on the county road, its sleek lines out of place among the dusty pickup trucks that usually passed by. It slowed near there. A gate then continued on. Probably lost, James thought. The GPS apps were always sending city folks down their road by mistake. "I've got some savings," Emily offered. "From the farmer's market stand last summer. That's your college money." James shook his head firmly. "We're not touching that. It's not enough for college anyway." There was no bitterness in her voice, just the same quiet acceptance he'd heard in his own father's voice during hard times. At least this way it could help save the farm. The broken pipe dripped steadily, each drop representing dollars they didn't have. James knelt and opened the toolbox, more to have something to do with his hands than from any real hope of fixing the problem. The tools inside were well worn, some handed down from his grandfather's day. Like everything else on the farm, they carried the weight of history. "We'll figure something out," he said, the words automatic now. "Go ahead and start the morning feed. I'll see what I can rig up here." Emily squeezed his shoulder before heading toward the barn. James watched her go, noting how she walked with her head high despite everything. Sarah would be proud of how their daughter had grown up, too fast maybe, but strong. The distant car had turned around and was passing by again, slower this time. Through the dust on his truck's window, James caught a glimpse of what looked like an expensive suit in the driver's seat. Then the car was gone, leaving him alone with the broken pipe and the morning sun beating down on his shoulders. He pulled a wrench from the toolbox, its familiar weight offering no solutions, but at least giving him a place to start. Sometimes that was all you could ask for, a place to start and the stubbornness to keep going. The sun had climbed to its full height when James heard the cry. He straightened from his work on the pipe, squinting across the wheat field. Through the golden stalks, he caught a flash of blue, too bright to be natural, too smooth to belong. "Here, hello?" A woman's voice, tight with panic. "Is anyone there, please?" James set down his wrench and started walking, his boots leaving tracks in the dry earth. As he drew closer, the scene came into focus. A woman in a tailored blue suit, one expensive-looking shoe in her hand, the other still on her foot. She was trying to balance on one leg while examining something on her calf. "Ma'am?" he called out, not wanting to startle her. "You all right?" She turned, relief flooding her face. Up close, she was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair escaping what had probably been a neat bun that morning. Despite her disheveled state, something about her bearing spoke of boardrooms rather than barns. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. "I'm so sorry to intrude, but I think something bit me." James closed the distance between them, noting how she tried to maintain her dignity despite her obvious distress. "Let's have a look. I'm James Miller. This is my farm you've wandered onto." "Alexandra," she said, wobbling slightly. "Alexandra Bennett. I was trying to find a place to turn around when my GPS stopped working. Then I felt this sharp pain." She gestured to her leg. "Here, let's get you sitting down first." James glanced around, then shrugged off his work shirt, leaving him in his t-shirt. He spread the shirt on the ground. "It's not exactly a church pew, but it's better than falling over." She hesitated only a moment before accepting his help to sit. Her remaining shoe, James noticed it was the kind his daughter Emily called a Louboutin, the ones with red soles that cost more than his monthly fuel bill, sank slightly into the soft earth. "May I?" he asked, kneeling beside her. At her nod, he gently examined her calf. "Ah, there's your trouble. Just a tick. Common enough out here." Alexandra's face paled. "A tick? Like Lyme disease tick?" "Not this kind," James assured her, keeping his voice calm. "But we should get it out proper all the same. I can help if you'd like, or we can call Doc Stevens in town." "You," she said quickly. "Please, if you know how." James nodded, pulling out his pocket knife. "My daughter gets them. Sometimes working in the fields. The trick is to be gentle, get the head and all." He opened the small blade and carefully positioned it against her skin. "Try to stay still." Alexandra watched, her manicured hands gripping the fabric of his work shirt beneath her. James worked with the same steady patience he used for delicate farm equipment, easing the tick out with practiced skill. When it was done, he wrapped it in a leaf and crushed it under his boot. "There now," he said, straightening up. "Let's get you somewhere more comfortable and clean that spot properly." He offered his hand. Alexandra took it, then stumbled as she tried to stand. Her removed shoe dangled from her other hand, its pristine red sole now smudged with farm dirt. "I'm sorry," she said, laughing shakily. "I must look a mess. This isn't exactly how I plan my morning." "Life rarely asks our permission before changing our plans," James said, steadying her. "My house is just over that rise. We've got a nice shaded porch, cold water, and a first aid kit. No need to apologize." Something in her expression shifted. At his words, a vulnerability flickering across her features. That's very kind of you, Mr. Miller." "James," he corrected, helping her navigate the uneven ground. "Mr. Miller was my father, and he'd have done the same thing." They made their way slowly through the wheat field, Alexandra holding onto his arm for support. From the corner of his eye, James saw Emily watching from the barn doorway, her expression curious. He gave her a small nod, their signal that everything was okay. "You know," Alexandra said as they walked, her voice steadier now, "this is the first time in a very long time that someone has helped me without checking their phone to Google who I am first." James chuckled. "Out here, ma'am, what matters is what kind of person you are, not what kind of phone you have. Though I admit those are mighty fine shoes for farm walking." Her answering laugh held a note of something that sounded almost like relief. Behind them, her muddied Louboutin heel marked their path through the wheat, a small sign of how far she'd already come from her usual world. The old porch swing creaked softly as Alexandra settled into it, her stockinged feet a stark contrast to the weathered wood beneath them. James emerged from the house, carrying two mismatched mugs, steam rising from both. The chipped porcelain, one Sarah's favorite, with faded roses around the rim, he handed to their guest. "It's just plain tea," he said, lowering himself into the wooden rocker nearby, "but my wife always said it tastes better in this cup." Something about the shape of it. Alexandra wrapped her fingers around the mug, studying its worn pattern. "Used, too," she said softly. "You said used to say." James nodded, appreciating how she'd caught the tense, how she didn't shy away from it. 5 years this October. Cancer, I'm sorry. The words were simple, genuine, not the automatic response he usually got. She took a sip of tea, then smiled slightly. She was right about the cup. Emily appeared in the screen door, carrying the first aid kit and a damp cloth. She'd brushed her hair, James noticed, and changed into a clean shirt. "Here you go, Dad. I checked on that pipe again. It's still holding with the temporary fix." "Thank ye." "You, sweetheart." James took the supplies, making quick work of cleaning Alexandra's tick bite. As he worked, Emily lingered on the porch, clearly curious about their unusual visitor. "You must be proud," Alexandra said, watching Emily head back to her chores. "She carries herself like someone who knows her worth." "Her mother's influence," James replied, but pleasure warmed his voice. "Emily's got her heart set on agricultural science at the State University. Smart as a whip, too." Something flickered in Alexandra's eyes, recognition maybe. Agricultural science? That's a growing field. Sustainable farming practices are becoming crucial for... She caught herself, taking another sip of tea. "Sorry. Sometimes I forget not everyone wants to hear market projections over morning tea." James leaned back in his rocker, studying her. "You know, most folks who end up lost on my farm don't typically discuss agricultural market trends." A smile touched her lips. "Most folks who help lost strangers don't typically make them feel so at home." She traced the rim of the chipped and cup with one finger. "It's nice, actually, being somewhere where no one expects anything from you." The morning sun had climbed higher, casting dappled shadows through the old maple tree onto the porch. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sound of Emily's voice as she talked to the chickens, a habit she'd had since childhood. "Sometimes," Alexandra said finally, her voice thoughtful, "I think we forget how to just be. Where I come from, everything's a transaction. Every kindness has a price tag." She paused, looking out over the wheat fields. "When was the last time you took a day off, Mr. Miller?" "James," he reminded her, "and I suppose that depends on what you mean by off. Land doesn't know it's Sunday." She nodded, understanding. "But you love it, the work, I mean. It's not just obligation." "It's in my blood," James agreed, patting his pocket where the watch rested. 4 generations of Millers have worked this soil. When you work the same land your grandfather's grandfather worked, it becomes more than just a job. Even when it's breaking your back, especially then." He smiled, remembering something. "My father used to say the land knows who loves it. Sounds like nonsense to most folks nowadays." Alexandra set down her empty cup, the chip catching the morning light. "It doesn't sound like nonsense to me. It sounds like..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It sounds like something real, something honest." A comfortable silence fell between them again. In the distance, the irrigation pump groaned, a sound that usually made James wince, but somehow, in this moment, it felt less urgent. The morning's panic over the broken pipe seemed to have drifted away like morning mist, though he knew it was just waiting to settle back in. "I should call my driver," Alexandra said finally, but she made no move to reach for her phone. "I've imposed on your kindness long enough." "Kindness isn't something you run out of by using it," James replied, the words coming naturally. "My mother used to say that." Alexandra's eyes met his, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of how rare these simple, genuine moments were. The chipped teacup sat between them on the small porch table, ordinary and imperfect, yet somehow more valuable for its flaws. Emily couldn't resist Googling their visitor's name that evening, her phone's glow illuminating her face as she sat at the kitchen table. The newspaper article that popped up made her nearly drop her device. Alexandra Bennett, CEO of Bennett Agricultural Technologies, revolutionizes sustainable farming, the headline proclaimed. The photo showed their morning visitor in her natural habitat, sleek conference room, perfect suit, commanding presence. "Dad?" she called out, voice uncertain. "You might want to see this." James looked up from the bills he was sorting, reading glasses perched on his nose. "What's that, sweetheart? That woman today? The one with the tick?" Emily turned her phone around. "She's kind of a big deal." James squinted at the screen, taking in the image of Alexandra standing before a massive corporate logo. The article detailed Bennett Agricultural Technologies' breakthrough irrigation systems, their market dominance, their billionaire CEO's vision for transforming modern farming. His mind went back to her sitting on his porch in stockinged feet, drinking tea from Sarah's chipped cup. "Well," he said finally, removing his glasses, "that explains the shoes." "Dad, she could buy our whole county if she wanted to." Emily scrolled through more articles. She was just named one of the most influential women in agriculture. Her company's developing drought-resistant wheat strains that could change everything for farms like ours. James thought about how Alexandra had watched his fields, how knowledgeable she'd been about agricultural science. Explains a few other things too. And we gave her Lipton tea in Mom's old cup. Emily's voice held a mix of horror and amusement. "Good tea is good tea," James replied, returning to his bills. "Doesn't matter what cup it's in or who's drinking it." But Emily wasn't finished. "She's been all over the news lately. There's this whole thing about her pushing back against corporate farming operations, supporting independent farmers instead." She paused, reading further. "Dad, her company's offering grants for sustainable farming initiatives, full funding for infrastructure upgrades, new equipment, everything." James looked up sharply. "Emily!" She recognized his tone, the one that meant she was crossing into dangerous territory. "I'm just saying, if she liked you, she wasn't here as a CEO," James interrupted gently. "She was here as someone who needed help. That's all it was, and that's all it needed to be." Emily set down her phone, studying her father. "But what if it could be more? What if this is one of those moments Grandpa used to talk about, when opportunity comes, dressed as coincidence?" The evening light filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the scattered bills on the table. The irrigation repair estimate sat on top, its number far too large for their current reality. James picked up Sarah's old ledger, where he still kept their accounts the way she had. Neat columns, telling an increasingly difficult story. "Sometimes kindness is just kindness," he said finally. "It doesn't always have to lead somewhere." "But sometimes it does," Emily persisted, softer now. "Sometimes it leads exactly where you need to go, even if you weren't looking for the path." James smiled at his daughter's wisdom, so much like her mother's. The newspaper article glowed on Emily's phone screen, Alexandra's professional smile a sharp contrast to the genuine one she'd shared on their porch. He wondered if she'd known that they would eventually discover who she was, or if she'd simply been enjoying the rare peace, or being treated like anyone else. "You know what your mother would say about all this?" he asked, running a finger along the ledger's worn edge. Emily's expression softened. "She'd say we're both right. That kindness is its own reward, but only a fool ignores a blessing when it walks right up and introduces itself." James chuckled. "Getting pretty good at channeling her, aren't you?" "Had a good teacher." Emily stood, kissing his cheek, before heading upstairs. She paused in the doorway. "Just think about it, Dad. Sometimes help comes from unexpected places. Mom taught me that too." Left alone in the kitchen, James picked up Emily's phone, studying Alexandra's photograph. In the image, she stood straight-backed and confident, every inch the powerful CEO, but he remembered how she'd looked on his porch, relieved, perhaps, to set that weight aside for a moment. The article praised her business acumen, her strategic brilliance, her market insights. Not a word about how she took her tea, or how genuine her laugh had sounded when she talked about his daughter's spirit. He set the phone down, turning back to his bills. But his mind kept drifting to that morning, to simple kindness and chipped teacups, to paths not looked for, but found all the same. 3 days later, the sound of tires on gravel drew James from his work in the barn. A sleek black car had pulled up to the farmhouse, different from the one Alexandra had been driving before. But somehow, he knew it was her. He wiped his hands on his work jeans and waited, watching as she emerged from the back seat. This time she wore a simple blouse and tailored slacks, dressed down by her standards, he suspected, but still looking every inch the CEO Emily's research had revealed. Her to be. In her hand, she carried a leather portfolio bearing her company's logo in understated gold. "Mr. Miller," she called out, then caught herself. "James, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Just finishing up some repairs," he replied, noting how she navigated the uneven ground more confidently now, though still in shoes that cost more than his monthly mortgage. "No ticks this time, I trust?" Her laugh carried across the yard. "No, though I did check thoroughly before getting out of the car." She reached him, extending her hand. "I wanted to thank you properly for your help the other day." James shook her hand, noting how she met his eyes directly, professional stance softening slightly. "No thanks needed. But I reckon that's not why you're here with that fancy portfolio." "Always direct," she smiled, but there was nervousness beneath it. "May we sit somewhere and talk? I have something I'd like to discuss with you." He led her to the porch again, where the swing still hung and Sarah's chipped teacup sat washed and ready in the kitchen. But this time, Alexandra remained standing, opening her portfolio on the small table between them. "First, I want to apologize for not being entirely forthcoming about who I was," she began. "No apology needed," James interrupted gently. "You were just someone who needed help. That's all I needed to know." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps, or relief. She pulled a business card from her portfolio, its golden embossing, catching the afternoon light. "Nevertheless, I should properly introduce myself. Alexandra Bennett, CEO of Bennett Agricultural Technologies." She paused, then added softly, "Though I must admit, I preferred just being Alexandra on your porch." James took the card, its weight substantial in his hands. "Fancy title, but titles don't change who people are at heart." "No," she agreed, "they don't, which is why I'm here." She drew a breath. "Your daughter, Emily, she wants to study agricultural science, yes?" James tensed slightly. "She does, though I'm not sure how that's relevant." "It's relevant because I've spent the last 3 days thinking about something you said, about the land knowing who loves it." Alexandra spread several documents on the table. "Your family has farmed this land for 4 generations. You understand? Something that many of my colleagues, with all their degrees and market analyses, don't. That sustainable farming isn't just about technology. It's about connection, history, love." She pulled out another document, this one bearing both their names. "I have a proposal for you, James. A partnership. Bennett Agricultural Technologies would provide full modernization of your irrigation systems, new equipment and funding for Emily's education. In return, your farm would become our premier testing ground for sustainable farming practices, combining your generational knowledge with our technological innovations." James stared at the document, his throat tight. "Ms. Bennett, Alexandra," she corrected, echoing his own words from days before. "And please, let me finish. This isn't charity, this is business, smart business." But she hesitated, then continued more softly. "It's also something else. That day on your porch, drinking tea from a chipped cup, was the first time in years I felt real, connected to what actually matters in this work." She pulled out one final document, a personal letter handwritten on expensive stationery. "This is separate from the business proposal. It's a personal offer from me to you, the chance to build something together that could help thousands of family farms like yours. No strings, no corporate politics, just 2 people who understand that some things are worth more than money." The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the porch, and somewhere in the distance, Emily was singing to herself as she worked. James thought about his grandfather's watch, about Sarah's teacup, about generations of millers working this land. Then he looked at Alexandra, not the CEO, but the woman who had sat on his porch and understood the value of imperfect things. "That's quite a business card you've got there," he said finally, picking up the golden embossed card again. "But I think I liked you better when you were just a lost traveler who needed help with a tic." Alexandra's professional facade cracked slightly, a genuine smile breaking through. "So did I, James, so did I." Long after Alexandra's car had disappeared down the dusty road, James sat at his kitchen table, staring at the deed to his farm. The yellow document had lived in the same drawer for decades, taken out only when necessary, its creases deep and familiar. His grandfather's signature sprawled across the bottom, bold and certain, while his father's name was printed carefully below it, and finally his own. Emily found him there as evening settled in, the deed spread before him like a map to some uncertain future. She set a fresh cup of coffee by his elbow, then settled into Sarah's old chair. "I saw her car," she said quietly, "the fancy black one." James nodded, tracing the property lines on the deed with one weathered finger. "She made us an offer. And you're afraid accepting it would be letting them down." Emily didn't need to specify who them meant. The generations of millers whose sacrifices were recorded in every fence post and furrow of their land. "Your grandfather used to say a miller's word and a miller's land were the same thing," James said, looking up at his daughter. "Sacred things, not to be given away lightly." Emily reached across the table, her hand covering his. "But she's not asking us to give it away, is she? She's asking us to help it grow." James smiled, despite himself. "When did you get so wise? Must be all that Miller blood." She squeezed his hand. "Dad, I saw the proposal she left. Full modernization, new equipment, my college tuition." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But more than that, I saw how she looked at you." "Emily, no, hear me out." "She looked at you the way Mom used to look at this land, like she saw something precious that needed protecting." Emily stood, moving to the window. "Remember what Mom always said about pride." James closed his eyes, hearing Sarah's voice as clearly as if she were still with them. "Pride's what makes you stand tall, but it's also what can keep you from reaching out when you're falling. And are we falling, Dad?" The question hung in the air between them. James looked at the deed again, thinking of the irrigation pipe held, together with prayers and patches, the tractor that needed replacing, the college acceptance letter Emily had hidden in her dresser drawer because she didn't want him to worry about the tuition. "Your mother also used to say that sometimes God sends help wearing strange shoes," he said finally, managing a small smile. Emily laughed. "Well, those were definitely strange shoes. Pretty sure they cost more than our truck." The evening light was fading, casting long shadows across the deed's aged surface. James thought about Alexandra's words, about connection, about things worth more than money, about building something together. "Did I ever tell you about the day your grandfather handed me this deed?" he asked, smoothing the document's worn corners. "I was about your age, full of big plans for modernizing everything. He listened to all my ideas, then told me something I never forgot." Emily leaned against the counter, a pose so like her mother's. It made his heart ache. "What did he say?" "He said, 'Son, this land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. Every change you make it with that in mind.'" James looked up at his daughter. "I've been sitting here wondering what he'd think about all this. About Bennett, agricultural technologies and their fancy proposals. And I realized something. Every miller who's worked this land has had to make hard choices to keep it alive. Your great-grandfather switched from cotton to wheat when the market changed. Your grandfather took out loans to buy that first tractor when everyone else was still using horses." He stood, carefully folding the deed. "Maybe this is our hard choice." Emily moved to hug him, and for a moment they stood in silence. The weight of generations settling around them like a familiar blanket. Besides, James added, his voice lighter, I have a feeling Alexandra Bennett isn't interested in changing what makes this place special. She just wants to help it survive. You called her Alexandra, Emily noted, pulling back with a knowing smile. James tucked the deed into his shirt pocket, next to his grandfather's watch. That's her name, isn't it? Uh-huh. Emily's smile widened. You know, Mom would have liked her. Someone who sees the value in old things, in doing things the right way, instead of the easy way. Outside, the evening birds were calling, their songs unchanged by time or circumstance. The land stretched out before them, golden in the setting. Sun, waiting as it had always waited, not for someone to change it, but for someone to help it thrive. The tomatoes from James's kitchen garden sat like jewels on Alexandra's fine bone china plate, bright red against stark white, farm-fresh simplicity meeting corporate elegance. She'd insisted on bringing dinner to the farm, but hadn't expected James and Emily to contribute their own offerings from their modest garden. These are incredible, Alexandra said, taking another bite. I can't remember the last time I had tomatoes that actually tasted like tomatoes. James smiled, watching her balance on one of their old kitchen chairs in her designer dress. She'd arrived with containers of catered food from what was probably Chicago's finest restaurant, but it was Emily's homemade bread and his vegetables that kept drawing her attention. Secrets in the soil, he explained, cutting into his own tomato, and talking to them a bit. Plants like conversation, same as people. Dad tells stories to the vegetables while he works, Emily added, grinning. Mom used to say that's why everything grows so sweet. They're trying to live up to his tales. Alexandra set down her fork, something soft crossing her features. You know, we spend millions on agricultural research, developing the perfect growing conditions, and here you are, telling stories to tomatoes. She shook her head, smiling. Maybe we should add that to the research protocols. The evening light streamed through the kitchen window, catching the mix of elegant catering containers and humble farm dishes spread across the worn table. Emily had insisted on using their best plates, a wedding gift to Sarah from her mother, alongside Alexandra's fine china, creating an odd but somehow fitting harmony. Speaking of protocols, Alexandra continued, reaching for her briefcase, but James held up a hand. Business after dinner, he said firmly. My father always said good food deserves your full attention. Even fancy Chicago food, he added with a wink. Alexandra paused, then closed her briefcase. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, James agreed. Would have loved this moment, his simple farm vegetables sharing a plate with food that probably costs more than our monthly grain. Shipment. The vegetables are winning, Alexandra admitted, spearing another tomato, though I should probably be offended on my chef's behalf. Emily, who had been quietly observing their exchange, suddenly stood. We should show her the sunset spot, Dad. You know, where Mum used to take her evening tea. James glanced at Alexandra's elegant dress and heels. It's a bit of a walk through the field. I came prepared this time, Alexandra said, reaching under the table to pull out a pair of practical boots. After the tick incident, I did some shopping, though I have to admit, the sales girl at Nordstrom was a bit confused by my request for authentic farm footwear. The laughter that followed felt natural, bridging the gap between their worlds as surely as the shared meal had done. They waited, while Alexandra changed into her boots, then headed out into the evening air, Emily leading the way through the wheat field. The sunset spot was nothing fancy, just an old wooden bench Sarah had placed atop a small rise years ago. But from there, you could see the entire farm painted in the day's dying light, golden wheat rippling like waves all the way to the horizon. Oh, Alexandra breathed as they reached it. This is something money can't buy, Emily suggested. Gently. Exactly. Alexandra stood for a moment, taking in the view. You know, I've seen farms all over the world, massive operations with the latest technology, perfectly optimized growing conditions. But this, She gestured at the landscape before them. "This feels real in a way they never did," James watched. Her face as she absorbed the scene, noting how the sunset softened her professional exterior, bringing back echoes of the woman who'd sat on his porch drinking tea from a chipped cup. "Real things usually aren't perfect," he said quietly, "but maybe that's what makes them valuable." Alexandra turned to look at him, understanding passing between them. Behind them, Emily discreetly wandered off to check on her garden, leaving them alone with the setting sun and all the possibilities it painted across the evening sky. "When I was little," Alexandra said after a moment, "my grandfather had a small vegetable garden. Nothing like this, just a few plants behind our house in the suburbs. But he loved it. Used to say you could taste the care that went into growing. And things." She smiled at the memory. "I never understood what he meant until tonight." James thought about the tomatoes on her fine china, about old stories and new boots, about bridges built with simple things. "Sometimes," he said, "understanding takes its own sweet time, like growing tomatoes." Her laugh carried across the wheat field, real and unguarded, belonging to neither the CEO nor the lost traveller, but to someone new, someone being grown, perhaps by evening conversations and shared meals on mismatched plates. The viral post appeared on a Tuesday morning, a grainy photo of Alexandra in her farm boots, walking through James's wheat field at sunset. The caption read, "Breaking: Billionaire CEO Alexandra Bennett spotted at small family farm. Sources say she's been making regular visits, romance or hostile takeover, story developing." Emily discovered it first, her phone buzzing with notifications from friends before she'd even finished her morning chores. By noon, the story had spread to major news outlets, each adding their own speculation to the mix. Business reporters focused on Bennett Agricultural Technologies' stock price jump. Entertainment blogs spun it as a real-life fairy tale. Agricultural forums debated what it meant for independent farming. James learned about it from Pete at the supply store, where he'd gone to pick up parts for the irrigation repair. "Quite the celebrity now, aren't you?" Pete said, sliding the local paper across the counter. There on the front page was a photo of his farm. "Whole town's talking about it. Betty at the diner says she's worth billions." James stared at the headline, "Local farmer catches billionaire's eye." The article beneath was filled with quotes from anonymous sources, describing Alexandra's visits, speculating about corporate takeovers and romance, painting pictures that bore little resemblance to the quiet conversations they'd shared. "It's not what they're making it out to be," he said firmly, folding the paper and tucking it under his arm. Pete shrugged. "Never is with papers. But Jim," he leaned forward, lowering his voice, "people are worried. These big corporations, they come in talking partnership, end up owning everything. Alexandra's not like that." The words came out sharper than James intended. "Alexandra, is it?" Pete's eyebrows rose. "Just be careful, Jim. Not everyone's as straightforward as us farm folks." The drive home was a gauntlet of curious looks from neighbors. James spotted 3 unfamiliar cars parked along his access road. Reporters, probably. His phone had 7 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize. Emily met him at the gate, her expression worried. "Dad, you need to see this." She held up her phone, showing him social media comments scrolling past. Some were supportive, others suspicious, all of them assuming things about his life, his relationship with Alexandra, his intentions for the farm. "Your mother always said gossip was the devil's radio," he muttered, pushing open the gate. "Alexandra called," Emily said, following him toward the house. "She sounds pretty shaken up. Her board of directors is demanding an emergency meeting." James stopped, turning to his daughter. "Did she say anything else?" "Just that she's sorry. That she never meant for this to happen." Emily hesitated. "Dad, some of the things people are saying about her using us for publicity, about you being after her money. People who matter know better," James cut in, but his voice was gentle. "The rest can think what they want." Inside, he found more missed calls, including one from his brother Marcus. There was also a text message from Alexandra. "Can we talk? In person? This isn't how I wanted any of this to go public." James sat heavily in his kitchen chair, the viral post still glowing on Emily's phone screen. The photo, though grainy, had captured something real. The way Alexandra's professional guard had dropped, the natural way she moved through his fields. Now, the comfortable space between them as they walked, but the comments beneath it twisted everything, turning something genuine into fodder for speculation and judgment. "What are you going to do?" Emily asked softly. James pulled out his grandfather's. "Watch, its steady ticking, a reminder of simpler times." Then he picked up his phone and typed a response to Alexandra. "Come to the farm. The sunset spot, 7 p.m. Just you, no drivers or assistants. We'll figure this out." Emily read the message over his shoulder. "The press will probably be watching. Let them," James said, his jaw set. "This farm has weathered worse storms than nosy reporters. Besides," he managed a small smile, "your mother also used to say that the truth has a way of outlasting lies." "And what is the truth, Dad?" James looked out at his fields, at the land that had supported his family for generations. He thought about Alexandra's laughter on his porch, about tomatoes on fine china, about bridges built between worlds that seemed so far apart. "The truth," he said finally, "is that sometimes the most valuable things grow in unexpected places, like your garden tomatoes, or—" He paused, choosing his words carefully, "or friendships that don't make sense to anyone but the people in them." Emily squeezed his shoulder, understanding. Outside, another car slowed as it passed the farm, probably another reporter hoping to catch a glimpse of their story. But the real story wasn't in their grainy photos or speculative headlines. It was in the quiet moments they hadn't captured, in choices made over chipped teacups and sunset conversations, in the careful tending of something as fragile and promising as a new spring planting. The board meeting agenda sat in front of Alexandra like a formal indictment. Item 1, discussion of CEO's recent activities and public image. Item 2, risk assessment, Miller Farm investment. Item 3, strategic communications plan. Each line felt like a subtle rebuke of the genuine connection she'd found at James's farm. Miss Bennett, Harrison Wells, the lead director, adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses. "While we appreciate your interest in hands-on research, the board has concerns about your personal involvement with the Miller property." Alexandra noted how he said property instead of farm, as if reducing James's generations of history to a simple asset on a spreadsheet. The conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of Chicago's skyline, but all she could think about was the sunset from James's wooden bench. "My involvement with the Miller farm," she emphasized the last word, "is precisely what our company needs. It's giving us direct insight into the challenges facing independent farmers." "That's not how the press is spinning it," Regina Matthews, another board member, slid several tabloid headlines across the polished table. "They're calling it Beauty and the Farmer. Our stock price is volatile. Competitors are suggesting you've lost focus." "I haven't lost focus," Alexandra said firmly. "I've found it." Meanwhile, 60 miles away, James faced his own tribunal at the monthly Farmers Association meeting. The community center's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as his neighbors voiced their concerns. "What happens when Bennett Ag owns half the county?" Tom Henderson's voice carried across the room. "They'll control prices, water rights, everything. No offense, Jim, but your girlfriend—" "That's enough, Tom." Mary Chen, who owned the farm adjacent to James's, stood up. "We all know Jim. 4 generations of Millers have worked that land. If he says this partnership is good for all of us, I'm inclined to listen." Back in Chicago, Alexandra spread out her own documents, not corporate projections or risk assessments, but photos of successful small farms using their technology. "Look at these results. The Miller farm could be our prototype for a new model, supporting independent farmers instead of replacing them." "It's a lovely sentiment," Harrison said. his tone suggesting it was anything but. However, the board needs assurance that your judgment isn't being clouded by personal considerations. Alexandra felt her professional mask slipping. You want to talk about judgment? James Miller taught me more about sustainable farming in one conversation than I've learned in a dozen corporate seminars. He understands something we've forgotten, that agriculture isn't just about efficiency and profit margins. It's about connection, stewardship. Very poetic, Regina said dryly. But we're running a business, not a poetry club. At the farmers' meeting, James stood to address his neighbors. I understand your concerns. Change is always scary. But Alexandra, Ms. Bennett, she sees something worth preserving in farms like ours. She's offering us a chance to survive without selling our souls. And what does she want in return? Someone called out. James thought about Alexandra in her farm boots, listening intently as he explained his irrigation methods, about her genuine delight in simple tomatoes and sunset views. She wants a partner, he said simply, someone who knows the land, who can help bridge the gap between corporate technology and farming tradition. The Chicago boardroom had grown tense. Alexandra could feel years of carefully cultivated professional relationships straining under the weight of her conviction. But when she spoke again, her voice was steady. You're right, we are running a business, and right now our business is at a crossroads. We can continue trying to replace traditional farming with corporate automation, or we can become partners in preservation. The Miller farm isn't just a test case, it's a blueprint for our future. She stood, gathering her papers. I've spent my career building this company's reputation for innovation. Now I'm showing you the most innovative path forward, and you're afraid to take it because it doesn't fit your conventional corporate narrative. Harrison leaned forward. Alexandra, be reasonable. Your reputation— My reputation, she interrupted, is built on recognizing opportunities others miss. That's what I'm doing now. If the board doesn't trust my judgment on this, perhaps we should discuss my position more broadly. The threat hung in the air like summer lightning. Alexandra had never used her position as leverage before, had built her career on collaboration and consensus, but some things she was discovering were worth fighting for. In the community center, the debate continued, but James noticed Mary Chen nodding thoughtfully at his words, saw others beginning to consider the possibilities. Change was coming to their community one way or another. The question was whether they'd help shape it or be shaped by it. The agenda on Alexandra's boardroom table remained unfinished, its corporate formality a stark contrast to the real conversations happening on both sides of the rural-urban divide. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important decisions couldn't be captured in meeting minutes or strategic plans. They happened in small moments of trust, in choices made when genuine connection confronted conventional wisdom. 2 keys lay on the wooden bench at the sunset spot, one silver, one brass. The silver key was to Alexandra's penthouse office in Chicago, symbol of everything she'd built over the last 20 years. The brass key was to James's farmhouse, worn, smooth by generations of Miller hands. The board gave me an ultimatum, Alexandra said quietly, watching the evening light play across the metal surfaces. Either I step back from personal involvement with the Miller Farm project, let the corporate team handle everything. She paused, gathering herself. Or I step down as CEO. James sat beside her, close enough to feel her tension but not touching. The evening wind rustled through the wheat, carrying the familiar scent of earth and growing things. And what does stepping back mean exactly? No more personal visits, no more sunset talks or garden tomatoes. Her laugh held no humor. Apparently, a CEO sharing meals with a contract farmer doesn't project the right corporate image. Contract farmer, James repeated softly. That's all I'd be. That's all you should have been. Alexandra turned to face him. Just another partnership agreement, another piece of the corporate strategy. Instead, she gestured at the farm. Around them, at the place that had become more than just a business opportunity. The keys caught the last rays of sunlight, casting small shadows across the weathered wood. James thought about the weight of legacy. His family's, hers, the ones they were creating with every choice they made. Emily got her college acceptance letter yesterday, he said, seemingly changing the subject. Full scholarship to the agricultural science program. She was too excited to keep it secret anymore. Alexandra's face lit up. James, that's wonderful. She'll be brilliant. She will. He smiled, pride mixing with something deeper. You know what she said? She said watching you these past months showed her that being true to yourself is more important than meeting others' expectations. Wise girl. Alexandra's voice wavered slightly. Though at the moment, I'm not sure if I'm being true to myself. Or just selfish. The board isn't entirely wrong. My involvement here has complicated things. Simple isn't always better, James replied. My grandfather used to say the strongest crops are the ones that have to fight a little for their place. In the world, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower. The brass key caught the light, its worn surface telling stories of countless doors opened and closed, of choices made and remade with each generation. You know, Alexandra said finally, I've been CEO so long, I almost forgot who Alexandra was without the title. Then I got lost on a farm, got a tick bite, and drank tea from a chipped cup. She picked up the silver key, its modern lines stark against her palm. And for the first time in years, I felt like myself. James nodded, understanding. The land has a way of stripping things down to what's real. No room for pretense when you're pulling ticks or picking tomatoes. The board wants an answer by tomorrow morning. Alexandra set the silver key down again. They've already drafted a press release about my strategic decision to focus on global initiatives. And what does Alexandra want? Not the CEO, just Alexandra. She turned to him, her professional mask falling away completely. I want to build something real, something that helps people like Emily see a future in farming, something that bridges the gap between your world and mine. She touched the brass key gently. I want more sunsets and honest conversations and meals that matter, even if it costs you that fancy office. The office was getting a bit lonely anyway. She managed a small smile. Too far from the tomatoes. James reached over, his weathered hand covering hers where it rested on the bench. The keys lay forgotten between them as the last light painted the wheat field gold. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, press releases and board meetings, community gossip and corporate politics. But here, in this moment, two people from different worlds had found something genuine enough to fight for. You know, James said softly, there's always room for one more Miller on this farm, even if she does wear fancy shoes sometimes. Alexandra's laugh carried across the field, real and unburdened. Below them, the farmhouse lights winked on, Emily's shadow moving past windows that had welcomed 4 generations home. The keys gleamed. In the gathering dusk, one representing everything Alexandra had been, the other offering a door to everything she could become. The old family album lay open on Alexandra's desk, its pages spread beneath the sleek corporate lighting of her office. James had given it to her that morning, a collection of faded photographs documenting 4 generations of Miller farmers. But it was one particular image that held her attention. A snapshot from 1987 showing James's father shaking hands with a distinguished-looking man in a business suit. A knock at her door interrupted her study. Ms. Bennett, Mr. Chen is here. To see you. Alexandra looked up, surprised. Michael Chen, one of her oldest board members, had been conspicuously quiet during the recent debates. Now he stood in her doorway, his usual formal demeanor softened by something she couldn't quite read. Is that Robert Miller? He asked, gesturing to the photograph. James's father. Yes. How did you... Because that man in the suit is my father. Michael moved closer, studying the image. He was the regional agricultural bank manager back then. Always said Robert Miller was the most honest farmer he'd ever met. When the drought of '88 hit, Dad approved loans for dozens of farms based solely on Robert's word about which ones were worth backing. Alexandra sat back, pieces clicking into place. Mary Chen, who owns the farm next to James, my cousin. Michael smiled slightly. Our family has been watching your Miller Farm project with considerable interest, perhaps more than you realized. He pulled out his phone, showing her a group text from Mary. It was a photo of James at the Farmers Association meeting, defending their partnership. The community's coming around, Michael said. They trust the Miller name, and more importantly, they trust what they've seen developing between you two. Alexandra touched the old photograph gently. The board has been so focused on corporate optics that they've missed the bigger picture. Michael straightened, his business persona returning. I've called an emergency session for this afternoon. I think it's time they heard a different perspective on family legacies and long-term vision. Across town, Emily was having her own revelation while giving Alexandra's niece Angela a tour of the farm. The 25-year-old corporate analyst had shown up unannounced, claiming she needed to understand the facts on the ground. So this is where Aunt Alex has been disappearing too? Angela said, watching James repair a fence with practiced ease. You know, I haven't seen her smile like that in years. The way she does in those photos everyone's sharing. Emily handed her a fresh tomato from the garden. Sometimes the simplest things mean the most. Angela bit into the tomato, her eyes widening. Oh my God, I usually hate tomatoes, but this is amazing. She looked around the farm with new understanding. You know, I've been running numbers for the board, trying to quantify the potential return on investment here. But I don't think they're measuring the right things. What do you mean? They're calculating square footage and crop yields, but they should be looking at how many family farms we could save, how much generational knowledge we could preserve. She pulled out her tablet. Help me understand your father's methods. I want to build a different kind of presentation for the board. Back in her office, Alexandra was still studying the old photograph when her assistant rushed in. Ma'am, you need to see this. Mary Chen just posted a statement online, and it's going viral. The post was simple but powerful. A series of photographs showing the history of cooperation between local farms, interspersed with recent images of Alexandra working alongside James. The caption read, "Some see a corporate takeover. We see a return to what made American farming strong. Partnership, innovation, and respect for the land. The Miller-Bennett project isn't threatening our way of life. It's helping preserve it." The comment section was filling with support from other farming communities, agricultural experts, and even some of Alexandra's industry peers. The narrative was shifting, transformed by the power of genuine connection and shared history. Michael Chen smiled at her surprise. You know, my father always said farming was about more than just growing crops. It was about growing relationships, trust, community. He touched the old photograph. Looks like you and James Miller figured that out all on your own. Alexandra looked at the family album, at the generations of Millers who had worked the land with integrity and vision. She thought about James's weathered hands and gentle wisdom, about Emily's dreams and Angela's newfound understanding. Sometimes, allies came from unexpected places, drawn together by the simple power of doing things right. We did, she said softly. Now we just have to help others see it too. The blueprint spread across James's kitchen table was unlike any farming diagram he'd ever seen. Traditional field layouts merged with cutting-edge technology sketches, his handwritten notes on soil management interweaving with Alexandra's precise technical specifications. It was a visual representation of their partnership, old wisdom and new innovation finding common ground. See here, James traced a section with his weathered finger, where the creek bed runs through the south field. Your irrigation sensors would work better if we adjusted them to the natural water flow patterns my grandfather mapped out 50 years ago. Alexandra leaned closer, her designer jacket brushing against his flannel shirt. And if we integrate that with our AI weather monitoring system, she quickly annotated the margin. James, this is brilliant. We're not just upgrading a farm, we're creating a whole new approach to sustainable agriculture. Emily and Angela sat across the table, the younger women sharing knowing looks at their elders' enthusiasm. Emily had contributed her own research on soil biology, while Angela's business analytics helped translate farming wisdom into corporate language. The best part, Angela said, tapping her tablet, is how scalable this is. Each farm could maintain its unique character while implementing these hybrid solutions. It's not about replacing tradition, it's about enhancing it. James watched Alexandra's face as she absorbed the plans they'd created together. Gone was the corporate mask she'd worn at their first meeting, replaced by genuine excitement that made her look years younger. She caught him looking and smiled, understanding passing between them. "You know what this reminds me of?" she said softly. "That first cup of tea we shared. How something simple and authentic can be exactly what's needed." Emily rolled her eyes, good-naturedly. "Dad, are you going to tell the teacup story at every planning meeting?" "Probably," James admitted, grinning. "Some things are worth repeating." The blueprint before them had started as a simple sketch 2 weeks ago, born from a sunset conversation about combining James's generational knowledge with Alexandra's technological resources. Now it had grown into something larger, a vision for preserving family farms across the country. "The board meeting is tomorrow," Alexandra said, straightening. "But for the first time, I'm not worried. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about showing there's a better way forward." James nodded, studying the detailed plans. The irrigation system he'd been unable to repair months ago would soon be replaced with something that honored the past while embracing the future. Like everything else in their unexpected partnership, it was about finding the right balance. "My father used to say, every generation has to find its own way of keeping the land alive," he mused. "Maybe this is ours." Angela's tablet chimed with another message from the corporate office. "The initial investor feedback is incredibly positive. They're calling it revolutionary and authentically progressive." She looked up with a smile. "Do I notice none of them mention how it all started with a tick bite? Some details are better left out of the official record." Alexandra laughed, but her hand found James's under the table, squeezing gently. The evening light streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating their blueprint for the future. It wasn't just a farm plan anymore. It was a bridge between worlds, a path forward that preserved what mattered while embracing necessary change. Emily stood to make fresh coffee, pausing to look back at the scene. Her father and Alexandra bent over their shared vision, Angela translating their ideas into corporate strategies, the family farm on the cusp of transformation. The blueprint between them was more than paper and ink. It was proof that the most powerful innovations often grew from the simplest acts of kindness. "You know," she said, echoing her mother's favorite phrase, "sometimes the best plans are written in pencil so life can help with the edits." James and Alexandra looked up at her words, then at each other, recognition flowing between them. Their story had started with a simple act of helping a stranger, grown through shared meals and sunset conversations, and blossomed into something neither of them could have planned. Now that very unexpectedness was becoming their strength, showing others that the future of farming didn't have to mean choosing between tradition and progress. It could mean finding the courage to write new blueprints, ones that made room for both. The small crystal vial of soil sat prominently on the sleek conference table, looking as out of place as James felt in his best flannel shirt among the sea of business suits. Alexandra had insisted on having the presentation in the farm's restored barn rather than the corporate boardroom, with both the board members and local farmers in attendance. Now that simple vial of earth had everyone's attention. "What you're looking at," Alexandra began, standing tall in her compromise outfit of a tailored blazer and practical boots, "isn't just soil. It's 4 generations of agricultural knowledge, enhanced by cutting-edge technology. It's the future of farming, rooted in respect for the past. The barn's old wood gleamed with fresh polish, local farmers filling one side while board members occupied the other. Through the open doors, James's wheat fields stretched toward the horizon, a living backdrop to their presentation. Mr. Miller. Harrison Wells adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses. You're suggesting that your traditional methods can improve our technological systems? James stepped forward, picking up the soil vial. This earth has been worked by my family for nearly a century. We learned its rhythms, its needs, its potential. What Alexandra and I are proposing is combining that generational knowledge with your innovations. Emily and Angela, manning the digital presentation, brought up side-by-side yield projections. Our pilot program, Angela explained, shows a 40% increase in sustainable crop production when we integrate traditional farming wisdom with Bennett's technology. But more importantly, Emily added, her voice clear and confident, it keeps family farms viable. It preserves the human element that industrial agriculture often overlooks. Mary Chen stood up from the farmers section. We've watched this partnership develop, seen how it's about more than just business. She faced the board directly. When Alexandra Bennett first started visiting the Miller farm, some of us were skeptical, but we've seen something remarkable grow here. And I'm not just talking about the crops. Alexandra moved to stand beside James, their shoulders nearly touching. The future of agriculture isn't about corporate takeovers or forcing out family farms. It's about partnership, innovation guided by experience, progress that preserves what matters. She nodded to Emily, who brought up images of similar farms across the country. We've already had inquiries from dozens of family farms wanting to participate in this program. They see what we've created here. A way to keep their legacy alive while embracing necessary change. James held up the vial of soil, letting sunlight catch its rich darkness. My grandfather used to say, you can't grow anything worthwhile without getting your hands dirty. Alexandra's taught me that sometimes the best growth comes from letting new ideas take root in well-tended soil. Regina Matthews, who had been Alexandra's strongest critic on the board, studied the yield projections carefully. These numbers are impressive, but what guarantees this can be replicated elsewhere? Because it's not about replication, Alexandra answered. It's about adaptation. Each farm, each family brings their own knowledge to the partnership. We provide the technology, they provide the wisdom. Together, we grow something better than either could achieve alone. The sun was setting outside, painting the wheat fields gold, the same view that had witnessed so many crucial moments in James and Alexandra's journey. Now it served as witness to another. I move to approve full funding for the Miller-Bennett Agricultural Partnership Program, Michael Chen announced, standing, and to formally acknowledge Alexandra's vision in seeing potential where others saw only profit. The vote that followed was unanimous, but James barely heard it. He was watching Alexandra's face, seeing the subtle shift as corporate victory gave way to personal triumph. She turned to him, their eyes meeting in shared understanding. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about building bridges, preserving legacies, growing futures. Emily stepped forward, taking the soil vial from her father's hands and placing it in a custom display case. Something old, something new, she said softly, echoing her mother's favorite wedding phrase. The best partnerships always need both. The crystal vial caught the last rays of sunlight, earth and light combining to create something beautiful. Just like the unexpected partnership that had begun with a tick bite and a chipped teacup, and had grown into a vision for the future, one that remembered to honor its roots, even as it reached for new horizons. The new farm sign caught the morning light, its carved letters bridging past and future. Miller Heritage Farm, a Bennett Agricultural Technologies partner. Below it, in smaller text, preserving tomorrow's traditions. James stood before it, coffee mug in hand, remembering the old wooden sign his grandfather had carved decades ago. This new one, designed by Emily and crafted by local artisans, somehow managed to honor both histories, his family's and the new one they were creating. Admiring our handiwork, Alexandra's voice carried across the dewy grass as she approached. Wearing what had become her signature compromise, designer jeans paired with practical work boots. She'd taken to spending 3 days a week at the farm, maintaining what she called a healthy balance between boardrooms and barns. "Remembering," James replied, handing her his coffee mug, a morning ritual they'd fallen into naturally. "My grandfather would have never believed this, though he might have approved of how we've done it." The morning sun illuminated the changes 6 months had brought. New irrigation systems hummed efficiently alongside heritage wheat strains. Soil sensors transmitted data to tablets while following field rotation patterns established generations ago. In the restored barn, a state-of-the-art educational center prepared to welcome its first group of farming families interested in the partnership program. "Emily called from college last night," James said, watching Alexandra sip his coffee. "She's already talking about expanding the program once she graduates. Says her professors are using our farm as a case study in sustainable agriculture." Alexandra smiled, pride evident in her expression. "Angela mentioned that too. The business schools are apparently just as interested. They're calling it authentic innovation, using technology to enhance tradition rather than replace it." They walked together toward the wheat fields, their shoulders brushing comfortably. The morning dew dampened their boots, but neither minded. These quiet moments had become precious, a reminder of how their partnership had begun, with simple conversations and genuine connections. "The board's quarterly review came in yesterday," Alexandra said, pausing to examine a wheat stalk. "Our pilot program has exceeded every projection. 3 more family farms have signed on just this month." "And how many of those decisions were made over cups of tea?" James asked, knowing the answer. Alexandra had taken to carrying Sarah's chipped teacup to meetings with potential partner farms, using it as both a conversation starter and a reminder of where their success had begun. "All of them," she admitted with a laugh, "though I think it's less about the tea and more about what it represents. People can tell when you're offering genuine partnership instead of just a business deal." The morning light strengthened, revealing more of their shared accomplishments. The old sunset bench had been joined by a small series of meeting areas, each designed to encourage the kind of honest conversations that had launched their partnership. The farmhouse kitchen, still home to mismatched plates and simple meals, now regularly hosted gatherings where corporate executives and family farmers found common ground. "Mary Chen asked me something interesting yesterday," James said, taking back his coffee mug. "She wanted to know if we'd ever expected this when you first showed up with that tick bite." Alexandra's laugh carried across the fields. "I'm pretty sure my biggest concern that day was Lyme disease, not revolutionizing agricultural partnerships." "Life has a way of growing things we didn't plant," James replied, echoing one of his father's favorite sayings. They reached the edge of the wheat field, where traditional plantings merged seamlessly with experimental sections. Like their partnership, the boundaries between old and new had softened, creating something stronger than either could have been alone. "You know," Alexandra said softly, "the corporate world keeps asking me if I'm satisfied with my return on investment here." She turned to face him, morning sun highlighting the contentment in her expression. "They never quite understand when I tell them some returns can't be measured in quarterly reports." James understood. Every day brought new evidence of their success, in the thriving crops, in the growing program, in the way their separate worlds had learned to nurture something unique together. The new sign behind them might mark the physical location of their partnership, but the real growth had happened in countless small moments: shared coffee mugs, sunset conversations, and the gradual realization that the best traditions were the ones flexible enough to embrace change while holding on to what mattered most. The wedding bouquet sat in its place of honor at the center of the harvest table, wildflowers and wheat stalks woven together in an elegant arrangement that, like everything else about James and Alexandra's relationship, bridged their two worlds. Around them, the restored barn hummed with celebration, corporate executives mingling comfortably with farming families, all gathered to mark both their marriage and the one-year anniversary of the Miller-Bennett Partnership Program. "Mom would have loved this," Emily said softly, adjusting the wheat stalks in the bouquet. She wore a maid-of-honor dress that somehow worked perfectly with her practical boots. All these different people finding common ground on our farm. Alexandra, who had chosen a simple cream suit for the occasion, touched the wheat stalks gently. "Sarah's been part of this journey from the beginning," she said. That chipped teacup of hers started it all. The program had exceeded everyone's expectations. 37 family farms had joined the partnership, each maintaining its unique character while embracing innovative technologies. The Miller farm had become a living laboratory where tradition and progress grew together, proving that preservation and innovation weren't opposing forces but complementary strengths. "Remember how worried everyone was last year?" Angela asked, approaching with a glass of local wine. She'd left her corporate analyst position to help run the partnership program full-time. Now they're calling it the future of sustainable agriculture. James joined them, his customary flannel replaced with a wedding suit that somehow didn't look out of place on him. He slipped an arm around Alexandra's waist with the easy comfort of someone who had found their perfect match. "Future's a funny thing," he said. "Sometimes it sneaks up on you wearing fancy shoes and asking for help with a tick bite." Laughter rippled through their small group, the kind of joy that comes from shared history and understood references. The bouquet caught the evening light streaming through the barn's windows, its wheat stalks golden against the wildflowers. A perfect metaphor for their union. Mary Chen raised her glass in a toast. "To the Miller-Bennett Partnership," she called out, "in all its forms." The gathering responded warmly, corporate directors and farming families alike recognizing the double meaning. Michael Chen, now the program's strongest advocate on the board, added his own words, and to proving that the best growth happens when we're brave enough to plant new seeds in well-tended soil. Alexandra leaned into James's embrace, her CEO persona softened by genuine happiness. "Did you ever think," she whispered, "that helping a lost stranger would lead to all this? Honestly?" James smiled, watching Emily chat animatedly with a group of agricultural science students who had come to study their methods. "I was just hoping to get through that day's irrigation repairs." The bouquet embodied everything their partnership had become. The strength of wheat stalks supporting the beauty of wildflowers, traditional materials crafted into something elegantly modern. Like their program, like their love, it proved that the most beautiful things often grew from unexpected combinations. Through the barn's open doors, the sunset painted their wheat fields in familiar gold, the same view that had witnessed their first real conversation. Now it witnessed something else, a gathering of people who had learned that the future didn't have to erase the past to make progress. "You know what this reminded me of?" Alexandra said, gesturing to their assembled guests. "That first dinner we shared with my fancy catering on your mother's plates. Who knew we were setting the template for our whole future?" James kissed her temple softly. "I think maybe you did. Even then, you saw the value in bringing worlds together." The wheat stalks in the bouquet swayed gently in the evening breeze, strong and resilient, supporting the delicate wildflowers just as tradition and innovation had learned to support each other on their farm. Like love itself, their partnership had grown from the simplest of beginnings into something that transformed everyone it touched. The sunset photo captured 3 generations of the Miller-Bennett family against the backdrop of their wheat fields. James and Alexandra in the center, Emily home from graduate school on the left, and between them, their 2-year-old granddaughter, Sarah, named for the grandmother she'd never met, but whose legacy lived on in every corner of the farm. Little Sarah's red boots were muddy from helping her father, Emily's husband, a fellow agricultural scientist, check the soil sensors. Her dark curls caught the same evening light that had witnessed so many crucial moments in her grandparents' story. In her small hands, she clutched a familiar object. Her grandmother Alexandra's old business card, now worn soft around the edges, from being carried in James's pocket all these years. "Tell me again," Emily said, settling onto the old sunset bench with her daughter in her lap. About the day it all started. Alexandra and James exchanged a knowing look. The story had become family legend, shared at gatherings and celebrations, studied in business schools and agricultural programs. But here, in the gentle evening light, it was simply their story. "Well," James began, his hand finding Alexandra's naturally, "it was a day pretty much like this one. The irrigation system was broken, the bills were piling up, and your mum was worried about college. And I was lost," Alexandra continued, smiling at the memory, "in more ways than one. Running from board meetings and expectations, trying to find my way back to something real." Little Sarah snuggled into her mother's embrace, already knowing what came next, but wanting to hear it again. The evening birds called across the wheat fields, their songs unchanged by the decades of progress that had transformed the farm into a model of sustainable agriculture. "Your grandfather," Emily told her daughter, "helped someone just because she needed help. No questions asked, no expectations, just kindness. And your grandmother," James added, winking at Alexandra, "was brave enough to let down her corporate walls and drink tea from a chipped cup." The Miller-Bennett Partnership Program had grown beyond anyone's expectations, spreading across the country and even internationally. But here, on this farm where it all began, the heart of their success remained simple: genuine connections, respect for tradition, and the courage to let love guide innovation. "You know what my favorite part is?" Emily asked, watching her daughter trace the faded letters on Alexandra's old business card. "How you both chose to be exactly who you were, even when everyone expected you to change." Alexandra laughed softly. "Oh, we changed, but we changed together, and we changed for the better." The sunset painted the scene in familiar gold, touching. The modern solar panels that powered the farm's advanced systems, gilding the heritage wheat that still grew strong in the fields. Like their love, like their vision, the farm had evolved while keeping its soul intact. Little Sarah suddenly pointed to a familiar figure making its way through the wheat. "Daddy!" she called out, spotting her father returning from his evening checks of their experimental crops. "You know," James said, watching his granddaughter run to her father with the same joy he'd once felt seeing Emily greet each new day on the farm, "your mother was right all along." "About what?" Alexandra asked, though she already knew the answer. "About pride, being what makes you stand tall, but also what can keep you from reaching out when you're falling." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm glad I reached out. I'm glad you stayed." The photo caught this moment too. 4 generations of a family that had bridged worlds, proved that progress didn't have to come at the cost of tradition, showed that the most innovative solutions often grew from the simplest acts of kindness. As the sun set on another day at the Miller-Bennett farm, the wheat fields whispered their ancient songs, mingling with the hum of advanced technology and the laughter of a little girl who would grow up knowing that love, like farming, was about nurturing something bigger than yourself, about planting seeds of kindness and watching them grow into unexpected harvests, about finding home in the space between what was and what could be. And it had all started with a tick, a chipped teacup, and 2 people brave enough to see past their differences to the shared future waiting to take root.